Hello, and welcome to Policy Matters on the CPRE Knowledge Hub, where we learn from policymakers and the organizations that support them about their efforts to improve the educational system. I'm Jonathan Sapovitz, the co-director of the Consortium for Policy Research and Education, and today I have Michelle Exstrom. Michelle is a program director at the National Conference of State Legislatures. She oversees work on educator effectiveness, finance, college and career readiness, assessments, accountability, school choice, and educational data. Michelle, that's quite a portfolio you have. And also joining us is Arkansas Democratic State Senator Joyce Elliot, who is serving her third term. She was previously a member of the Arkansas House of Representatives from 2000 through 2006. Welcome, Joyce.
Thank you.
And also joining us is Wisconsin State Republican Senator Luther Olsen, who was elected to the state Senate in 2004 after serving in the Assembly for 10 years.
Good to be here.
So the National Conference of State Legislators released a report called No Time to Lose, How to Build a World-Class Education System. And the report had 7 recommendations for state policymakers. Michelle, can you just talk about the major recommendations that the report came out with?
Sure. After a period of study, the legislators found several things that were important. The first was that the bad news is that we weren't being competitive. But the good news is that there very much was common elements that you can find in other countries, things that we could learn from and that we could implement here in the United States. So this study group recommended that we take a look at those common elements. They also recommended that in a state that wants to take this seriously, there's very specific steps that those states could be taking. First of all, they could build an inclusive team and set priorities. That means including stakeholders and all the policymakers that you would want to be involved in a conversation like this and begin to set priorities for the direction that you want to have your state go. Then you need to study and learn from the top performers. What is it that those countries are doing that has made the difference for them in their education system? And then create a shared statewide vision that includes input from stakeholders and policymakers. Come together and really figure out where it is that your state wants to go. Then you can begin to benchmark your policies. Look at what your policies are compared, and practices, I might say, compared to what the policies and practices are in these world-class education systems. Once you know what the policy gaps are, then you can begin to get started. But sometimes this feels overwhelming. So our recommendation was get started with at least one piece of this. Don't let an entire systemic change hold you up. Get started somewhere, but understand that all these pieces fit together. You can't really do one without the other, but you have to get started somewhere with at least one piece of reform.
Joyce, from you were part of this study group process. From your personal perspective and from the work that you're doing in Arkansas, what were the major takeaways for you?
Having a coherent system, setting our standards high, and staying with that 20 to 25 years or so that Michelle mentioned. We have the evidence over the years, because we have been doing this reaching and grabbing for about the last 25 years or so, with all kind of efforts, and we keep getting results that are just the same, or certainly not placing us on a world stage.
And Luther, from your perspective, both personally and for Wisconsin, what did you see as the major takeaways?
The thing that was really enlightening for me is the importance of a system and a plan to move forward. In Wisconsin and a lot of other states, we all talk about local control, where everybody does their own thing. All schools, should be able to set their own standards, which they do, and decide, what kind of teachers they should hire and the whole 9 yards, which is good. But you need a system in place. This is a systems improvement plan, so that you have to say, okay, we need to, if we're going to go from where we are today to where we want to be, closing the achievement gap and all those kind of things, we have to have a system in place to do that. And these are the steps we need to take.
There was a big emphasis in this report on early childhood education. And so why is this such an important area of emphasis?
One of the things that all of these countries are focused on, hyper-focused on equity. And they believe and have shown that that equity has to start from the very beginning of a child's life. So whether it's something that's ingrained in the community, such as it may be in many of the Asian countries, or whether or not it's something that's done deliberately as a part of policy, say Ontario, for instance. I particularly wanted to focus on, I was one of the two people who focused on Ontario. And so the things that they do, not just there, but throughout, they believe deeply that a child needs to show up prepared and ready to learn. So we tend to think of that as pre-K. They tend to think of it as from the very beginning of a child's life. And a lot of that has to do with focusing on parents, whether or not they have the ability to make sure their kids are prepared. And if they're not, then somebody steps in, whether it's by policy or whatever. So if that child is prepared when the child shows up, that makes the equity question a little bit less onerous as we're going along. However, I do want to stress, though, they stay focused on equity as they're moving ahead. Because if that child is not prepared, it just makes the job even harder.
Wisconsin is a fairly homogeneous state. It does decently well on national indicators. So how do you think about creating a sense of urgency for change in your state?
You know, that is the biggest issue. It's a blessing and a curse, because when you're good, you want to be very careful not to go backwards. If you're a state that, is at the bottom or close to the bottom of the rankings in the 50 states, you'll just about grab onto anything to try to get better. But when you're doing well, you have to understand that your population is changing. We're having more and more students in school with free and reduced lunches. They come to school with issues. We have mental health problems with kids. We are becoming a more diverse population than we've ever had before. So we have to change things. And it's difficult to get people to realize that the same old isn't going to work, and we need to look at something.
How did the study group think about the cultural differences and how to think about both translating those differences and how to make things our own?
There were very common elements. There are very similar approaches and policies and practices that they had in place, and we outline those in our study group report. One being that children come to school ready to learn, whether that be through state-supported systems or a culture where the family supports that and provides that. Either way, those countries very much prioritize that. Across cultures, they do. And then once the child gets to school, that continues to be supported. Those supports don't just drop off. As Senator Elliot mentioned, we discovered that regardless of culture, regardless of practice, they very much view teachers as nation builders. They know that that is first and foremost the most essential piece of their education system, that without world-class teachers, they won't have a world-class education system. And they give teachers the space to learn and grow and to really own their own profession and to really guide education in their countries. Across the boundaries, they also very much prioritize what we call career tech education or applied education. This is something that we saw time and time again, that students aren't prepared just for college, but they're very much prepared for career, and that is not looked at as an alternative career track. That's an alternative track in education. That's considered an equal track in education. So there are definitely things that they all had in common that we felt transcends the cultural differences that we had.
So I want to thank Joyce Elliot from Arkansas and Luther Olsen from Wisconsin and Michelle Exstrom from NCSL. You've really played an important leadership role in helping states to think through these things that really will make our system better. So thank you all.
You're
Thank you.
quite welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.